33. He could smell the trees even from the path, but they appeared as silhouettes against the brilliant lighting at the rear of Dryad House. It was bright as day, almost as if those inside were afraid of the dark. But he couldn't allow himself to believe they were weak. He couldn't underestimate them. Especially the person in that room up there, 3 windows in from the right, 3rd story. Rodin wondered if she was working on another article, or if she was planning how best to protect Leopold. At least she wasn't by his side. This way he could get Shay alone. His hand dropped to his side to the bulge in his hip pocket. It felt strange having his old friend so exposed in a normal pocket rather than one he'd altered. But it was good to have a familiar tool with him. A shape moved, a shadow on the window covering. Toilet break? Grabbing a drink? Could be anything. But he'd wait until she returned. Rodin pulled out his screen, checked the hacks he'd set up earlier. Security to Shay's apartment was registering normal, but he'd placed a loop just beneath the surface, triggered to run the moment a door or window was opened. While he had his screen out, Rodin read through the messages he'd timer sent earlier. There were 2 of them, one for Sergio, the other for Daventry. In both messages he apologized for his sudden departure, leaving reasons vague. He thanked both men for all they'd done for him, and listed the meals he'd placed in storage for Sergio, enough for a couple of weeks. As an afterthought, he'd suggested Paskia as a replacement assistant. She knew the artist, was comfortable in his presence, and in the message Rodin hazarded the notion that both work and time away from her aunt would help the young woman settle into her new life. The timer on both messages was still counting down. In a few hours, the artist and his agent would know that Terrell was not returning. The shadow moved back into the room, and then dipped down and remained steady. Sitting at a desk then. Perfect. Rodin pushed through the trees and scaled the metal fence at the back of the building's gardens with ease. A few quick steps more, and he launched himself up onto the first balcony, then climbed. The exercise warmed his arms and legs and increased his heart rate, and he felt a comforting glow when he stood in front of the frosted glass of Shay's sliding doors. There was an old-style lock on one of them, but before Rodin reached for the picks he'd stowed inside his jacket, he placed a gloved hand on the glass and exerted pressure. The door slid open soundlessly. Rodin took a breath, listened for movement or an alarm. There was neither. His hack was working. It was safe to enter Shay's property. Shay's living area was sparsely decorated, a sofa that sat away from the wall, a low table in front of it, an easy chair opposite. There was a bookcase half filled with what looked like binders. The curtain for the sliding door was pulled to one side, bunched up near the sofa. And through an arch Rodin saw a basic food prep, and a sturdy but plain set of chairs around a wood effect table. Rodin padded silently through the open door, into the area the plans called a lobby, a wide corridor leading to the main access to the apartment and all the other rooms. He crept along to the last door on the left, the one that was open enough to allow light to spill out. He peered in. Shay sat at a desk reading from a screen and making notes on a pad. A steaming mug sat next to a desk lamp. Rodin grabbed the door handle and pushed gently, eyes fixed on the back of the woman's head, ears alert for any sound. He eased himself into the room, closing the door silently before moving a couple of paces. Position was always important. Here, with his back to the wall, he could see both Shay and the door. "Good evening, Shay," she gasped. The screen clattered on her desk as she spun. Her arm flew round and the mug shot through the air. He battered it away. The liquid was hot on his sleeve, but not enough to burn. Not the warm welcome I was hoping for.
"What do you want?"
Her voice was firm, but her hand trembled on the desk. "I want your help." Her mouth opened and her brow furrowed. He waited for a response.
"What?"
"I want your help. I came here tonight to ask for your assistance." She laughed.
"Why would I help you?"
Rodin leaned in, pierced her with his gaze and said the phrase he'd spent far too long preparing. "Is your niece at home?" The simplicity of the phrase belied the preparation of that threat. Rodin had run through so many alternatives. Maybe we should see Paskia. "How much do you care for your niece?" It would be a shame if something happened to Paskia. But none sounded right. When he said her name, he felt his throat constricting and his tone suffered. He didn't want to be too blunt either. Best to leave the implications vague. She had him pegged as a cold-blooded killer, and she would imagine the worst. But her reaction was not what he expected. She sat back in her chair, head at an angle, a cold glimmer in her eyes.
You haven't seen enough of her at Sergio's?
She didn't care, that much was obvious. And Rodin should have known this. The clues were all there, Paskia's hesitation over talking about her aunt, Shay's cold manner in the council gardens. She was helping Paskia not through altruism, but because it suited her purpose. She was using Paskia. Not as an assassin but for something else. Something that involved getting the girl close to Rodin. He formed his words with care. I wouldn't use her as a spy. Did she even know what you wanted from her? Shay puffed out a breath, maybe a surprised laugh, and Rodin knew he'd judged correctly. Then her expression softened.
Maybe honesty would have garnered better results,
She said.
I thought she would have enough intelligence to spot something. But no, she talks of Sergio, and then of your muscles and scars, as if that's any use to me. As a source of information, she was useless.
Rodin pushed. Was it even worth taking her on?
In all honesty, no. Oh, she's pleasant enough in a kind of airy, detached way, she keeps the place clean. But for what I wanted, she's useless.
She opened her mouth as if to say more, then stopped. Her head tilted again.
So what happens now? Do you kill me, like you want to kill Counselor Leopold?
Her hand rested on the desk, one finger on the screen, and Rodin scanned quickly looking for anything she might use as a weapon. But unless she threw the screen at him, she had nothing. You know too much. You're a threat. But as I said, I came here to ask for your help. She snorted a laugh.
I don't think so. You came here because it serves your purpose. You want me to help you get close to Leopold, but do you seriously think I'd allow that to happen? I know about you. So do you think I'd let you threaten me like this?
Her finger tapped on her desk. No, on her screen, where a small icon the size of her nail glowed pale green. Rodin spun, hearing the unmistakable sound of someone running. The door burst open. Rodin crouched, ready. The man was well-built, honest muscle. He wore stubble on his chin, same length as the hair on his head. And his eyes darted round the room with practiced efficiency. As soon as he saw Rodin, his knees bent, his arms raised a fraction. Not a natural stance for someone from the dome, but a sign of one used to fighting dirty. This was the assassin Shay had hired from the districts. The man lunged fast. Rodin dodged, jabbed his elbow into the man's side. The thug stumbled, recovered quickly.
No.
Shay leapt to her feet.
Not here.
The man ignored her and lunged again. Rodin stepped in, turned, slammed into the man. He rammed his boot down, felt pressure as it ran down the man's shin, heard him grunt. As the assassin staggered back, Rodin darted from the cramped office. In the living area, he spun, facing the man. The thug's chest rose and fell, and his mouth twisted into a snarl. Metal glinted in his hand. Rodin raised his hands, palms out. I have no trouble with you. I don't want to kill you. The man grinned, his teeth uneven and yellow.
Good. Should make it easier for me to kill you.
I said I didn't want to. Rodin backed away, his leg hitting the sofa. Doesn't mean I won't if I have to. The assassin came closer, and Rodin edged round the sofa now. As long as the furniture remained between them, Rodin was safe. A lunge across it would put the man off balance too much. A professional wouldn't risk such a move. But they could only circle for so long. Rodin let one arm drop close to his pocket.
You're scared,
the man said, his shoulders rocking with a derisory laugh. Of you. The man held the blade firmly, his wrist loose enough that he wasted no energy, but his arm bent, ready for sudden movement. And the man watched Rodin intently.
Oh, you should be scared,
the assassin said, twisting his blade so that it reflected light into Rodin's eyes. A standard move, and one that failed to intimidate Rodin. He didn't blink either, which meant he didn't miss the way the assassin's eyes darted to one side, looking past Rodin and to the curtain. Rodin had only just gone past the bunched material, and now he realized there had been a smell, a presence in the air. Sweat and mud. He glanced down. The assassin's boots were clean. Why would Shay stop at hiring only one assassin? The thug's eyes were fixed on Rodin once more. He moved along the back of the sofa, Rodin along the front. They passed one another, close enough for Rodin to catch a waft of something bitter as the man breathed out. The curtain shifted. It might have been a breeze, but there were no open windows. Rodin reached the end of the sofa and slowed. The thug came closer. He had to time this just right. Rodin moved toward the curtain, as the assassin rounded the end of the sofa. It was the first time they'd been on the same side, and the thug grinned. Rodin forced a gasp and shifted a leg closer to the sofa, let it catch on one of the supports. He stumbled, arms spinning, one hand brushing the curtain. And the assassin grabbed his opportunity. But this was Rodin's opportunity too. As the thug lunged, Rodin planted his back foot firmly, threw himself forward. The blade sliced through the air where Rodin's head had been, and Rodin reached up, grabbing the man's wrist. He carried on twisting, dancing round the man, locking his free arm around the man's shoulder and pulling the man's own blade up to his neck. The man struggled, but Rodin held him, his arms tight and hot. Through gritted teeth he said, "I have no desire to kill you." The curtain rested against Rodin's arm. It felt heavier than it looked, more solid than it should have been. Like it was pushing him. Rodin spun. He grabbed the assassin, the one by the sofa, and pulled, then thrust him toward the curtain. There was a grunt, a cry that stopped abruptly. The second assassin, still half hidden by the curtain, was tall and thin, with long hair tied in a ponytail. In his left hand he held a blade. But the first assassin held it too, tight against his chest. Blood already flowed from the wound. A scream from food prep. No, two. One deeper, a shouted demand to stop. The other higher, gasping, terrified. The big man gurgled, staggered against the sofa, then collapsed to the floor. The thin man stared at the bloody blade in his hand. Rodin stepped away from the sofa, giving himself more space. Ponytail barely glanced down at the dead body, before stepping over his fallen colleague. Shay yelled for him to stop. Someone whimpered. Movement just to the edge of Rodin's vision. Ponytail saw it too, and he leaped round the sofa. Rodin spun, already knowing what he'd see. Knowing he'd be too late to stop it. The assassin grabbed Paskia and turned, one hand grasping her clothes, the other holding a blade to her throat. He pulled, lifting her until only her toes touched the ground. Her face was pale, lips trembling. Her wide eyes stared.
No.
Shay, standing to one side, hand up but rooted to the spot.
I won't have innocent bloodshed. Not in my rooms.
Then he lies down.
The man's voice was rough. Rodin noticed the scar tissue across his neck.
On his front. Hands clasped over his head. Just in front of the sofa. Now?
Rodin stayed where he was. Before making a move, he needed to know more about this other mercenary. Ponytail grinned, pure violent pleasure.
You don't care for her?
Rodin jerked his head to Shay. Ask her. He saw Paskia's head tremble, heard her sharp, desperate breaths. The thin man didn't take his eyes from Rodin, but twisted his head a fraction.
You said he cared.
I said he appeared to care. But he's a liar.
She spat that word, and Rodin was tempted to laugh. Rich, coming from someone who used an innocent girl as a spy.
You going to get down?
Ponytail tightened his arm, the blade pushing against Paskia's smooth skin.
Doesn't bother me if she dies,
he said.
I only get paid to remove you, but a bit of fun, a bit of practice? Why not?
Rodin shrugged. She's in your hands.
Terrell.
Little more than a whisper.
Shut it. And know she's in your hands. Lay down and I let her go.
You think I can trust you? Rodin knew the type, tough but liked the show. He would play along, wait for the inevitable mistake. Paskia squealed and the blade pushed harder. A red drop ran down her neck. Rodin felt the blade in his own hand tight by his side. He nodded towards Paskia, looking at the blood. You're going to mess up her clothes. The man leered, and a cackle escaped his lips.
You want to take them off? Hey girlie, looks like this guy gets off on your suffering. You want to make him happy, get naked?
Been there, seen that, Rodin said with a nonchalant wave of his hand. He saw a flicker in the man's eyes, knew he'd read Ponytail well.
Yeah? Like that, is it? Oh, I'm sure he whispered so much in your ear. How much it meant to him. How he'd never leave you. How he'd never felt like this before. And all along, all he wanted was a bit of relief. He used you, girlie. He used you, and now he's casting you aside. What do you think of that? Bet you'd like to see him squirm, wouldn't you? See him bleeding like a stuck pig. How about we get a little closer, you tell him what you think. Then when I've stuck this blade into his black heart, you can do what you want with him. How does that sound, girlie? I bet your aunt would like to watch too. What do you say, Shay?
Ponytail glanced to one side. And that was all the opportunity Rodin needed. His arm uncoiled and his blade flew through the air end over end. The man stayed upright for a moment, the smile frozen on his face. His fingers loosened and his blade clattered to the floor. Then his legs crumpled. He fell, dragging Paskia with him. She squealed when she landed on him, but he made no sound. Rodin saw her eyes move to the blade sticking out of the man's head. It was one of his better blades, but the damage from the man's skull made it worthless now. At least it had served its purpose. Rodin took a step forward, but Paskia backed away, shuffling into a corner. Then Shay was with her, helping her up, guiding her to the sofa. Two bodies on the floor. Ponytail's open, unmoving eyes said he was dead. Rodin walked over to the one behind the sofa, nudging the big man's leg with his foot. Nothing. But he needed to know for sure. He stamped hard and heard the bone crack. The man's face didn't change its expression. That was good enough for Rodin. He walked back into the center of the room, sat on the easy chair, facing the two women on the sofa. Paskia had her face buried in Shay's chest, the older woman rubbing her back. I meant what I said. I didn't want to kill them. Shay shook her head. He doubted she'd seen anything like this. Maybe she thought it would be quick and easy, a single stab to bring the victim falling gracefully to the floor. She didn't expect the blood or the violence. You hired those men to kill me. Did you really expect me to let them do that? She gave no answer. You knew it would be me or them. She found her voice.
But not in my home.
He shrugged. At least there are fewer witnesses. And I'm sure you'll remove the evidence. It's not as if they'll be missed. Those two and myself, we're nothing but ghosts in the system.
You're not a ghost, you're a monster. Rodin, the name of the beast.
Paskia turned her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, face streaked with tears, and there was a thin red line on her neck. But behind the face were so many emotions struggling to break out. Rodin could see her features twitching. Then she hid her face once more. But she spoke. He could barely hear her. 3 words. 1 question.
Who are you?
I'll let your aunt answer that one. Shay flinched at the stress he put on the word aunt. But she spoke.
His name is Rodin. He's not from Ross or any other dome. He's an outsider, hired to infiltrate society in order to assassinate Counselor Leopold. Everything he has done has been with that aim in mind. He is nothing more than a hired killer. Did I miss anything?
Mainly accurate. Paskia, I don't like deceiving people, whatever you or Shay may feel. Yes, I come from outside, and yes, I was hired to remove Leopold. I have killed many people, both men and women, mostly for money. It's my job and I'm good at what I do. Certainly better than these two, and Rodin waved an arm across the room. But that's not the whole story. I didn't come here tonight to kill, but to talk. Shay, I have a proposition for you. She snorted.
Would I do what you say and you promise not to kill me? You think I trust you? You don't care about anyone but yourself. You almost let Paskia have her throat cut.
It was Rodin's turn to laugh. That would have been the easy option, let him kill her, then face him one-on-one. But think she's alive, he's dead. What does that tell you? You know my name and my job, but that doesn't mean you know me. So just shut up and listen. Okay. He waited. When she nodded, he continued. Leopold has dangerous enemies. They hired me to remove him, and if your mercenaries had stopped me, they would simply hire someone else. In the long run, killing me won't keep the man safe. It'll only delay the inevitable. Shay avoided his eyes, looked at Paskia most of the time. He couldn't read the woman, but he had to make her understand. He needed to wield these words as firmly as he wielded a blade. I'm a professional, which means I researched the target. I learnt a great deal about Leopold. I spent time with him, listening to his ideas. And I became interested. He spoke a great deal of truth. Both women had their eyes on Rodin now. I dug deeper, discovered that Leopold wasn't alone, either here or in other domes. Many people, all questioning the restrictions on movement. Of course, they couldn't question too loudly, because authority is always listening. But they were talking in the shadows, working together. People from all over the domes, including many in positions of power and responsibility. And all had a common node. Shay's eyes widened and her mouth hung open. You've done an impressive job, Shay, subtle, careful and determined. Ruthless too, the mess in this room shows that. As does Paskia's presence. Pretending she was your niece, bringing her into this dome, setting up the modeling position with Sergio and all to exert information. Rodin saw Paskia's body tighten, and realized he was going too far. He didn't want to antagonize Shay. But I know you were doing what you thought was right. It takes courage to look beyond your own interests. I see that in Leopold too. Maybe he's overly idealistic, but he genuinely wants what's best for everyone, including those on the other side of the glass. Rodin paused. Shay was fighting a smile, and he knew he'd got through. I know what it's like out there, and it's not how you imagine it. Yes, it's violent, and there are many who deserve to die. But there are also many, many good people, fighting to do the right thing. They help others, they raise their children as best they can. They do whatever they can to make their district a better place. They don't deserve to be pushed aside and forgotten about. They deserve their happiness, their security. And knowing that, how can I work against them? How can I turn my back on my own people? He hadn't meant to say that, but it felt appropriate. Opening up like that made him more human, less of a killing machine. But he still needed to win Shay over. I was brought into the dome to remove Leopold. If I fail, his enemies will hire someone else. Take me out of the way, and you only delay the inevitable, Shay. But I have a plan. I know how to solve this, maybe not ideally, but it's the best option available.
How?
Her voice was quiet, but the question was genuine. Shay was with Rodin on this. I need to see Leopold again. But after our last meeting, you know how that ended, I'm going to need someone as a go-between. I need someone he trusts to pass on my message, and to persuade him to meet with me. I know you still have your doubts about me, but please believe that I no longer want to see Leopold a corpse. His ideas and his voice need to be heard. I truly believe that. He opened his arms, a sign of surrender. He leaned in, lower than Shay, so that he was forced to look up into her face. Shay, will you help me?